All right, folks, so I want to be conscious of your time, so we're going to kick things off here. So welcome to How to Streamline and Storyboard Your Curriculum. I'm Kelsey Jascott. I'm our Director of Customer Success here at EduPlanet. I'm very, very excited to have you with us today. So before we get started, I just want to jump into a couple of housekeeping items, and then we're going to turn it over here. So as we move along, so very briefly, just a couple of FYIs here. This is a webinar, so all of you are currently muted and your video is turned off. So we want you to be able to focus on Heidi and Allison as we dig into the presentation today. I am going to encourage you to use both the chat or the Q&A to submit any questions that you might have as we move through the presentation. There is going to be time at the end with both Heidi and Allison to kind of ask some of those questions. Anything that our team can answer, we will do so as well as we move through. Love to encourage you to follow us on social media. We're putting out a ton of great content lately. So you can see our Twitter handle there is @EduPlanet21. We also have a link to our LinkedIn there, but find us on LinkedIn as well. We are recording this session, so we'll send that out in the next couple of days. So be in tune for that too. You'll also probably see notes of that on our social media. So again, if you follow us, you'll stay in tune with that. So very quickly, here's our agenda for the day. So I'm going to do a couple of brief introductions here in just a minute. I'm going to then turn it over to both Heidi and Allison for how to streamline and storyboard your curriculum. So for the content of the presentation. I also want to take some time there at the end to turn it over to one of our team members to talk a little bit about how EduPlanet can support your storyboarding efforts. So we'll dig into that for a few minutes. And then again, we will have some Q&A time there at the end. So as we move on, let me just introduce our panelists here. So first of all, we have Dr. Heidi Hayes Jacobs with us. Heidi is an international curriculum expert. She's a consultant. She's an author. Many of you on the line know her name. We also have with us Ms. Allison Zmuda, who is also an international curriculum consultant, also the co-director of the Institute for Habits of Mind. So very, very excited to have both of them with us. I've had the opportunity over my 5 years with EduPlanet to learn from both of these ladies. I think you're really, really going to enjoy the presentation. Also, if you are one of my current customers on the line, you've definitely heard me talking about the concept of storyboarding over the past couple of weeks. So very, very excited to share that content. We also have with us Mr. Jared Hodnett, who is our Director of Product Management here at EduPlanet. Jared and his team have been very, very hard at work, creating a really great opportunity for you to do your storyboarding in EduPlanet. So we will show you that later on today. So without further ado, I want to hand the screen over to both Allison and Heidi for the presentation. Stay tuned. Again, feel free to ask any questions that you may have, both in the chat window or the Q&A as we move through. All right, Heidi, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to get the screen up. And good afternoon. My name is Allison Zmuda, and I am joined with Heidi Hayes Jacobs. And we're going to get started. Let me get the screen up. Going old school. There we go. Now we're at the beginning. Here we go, Heidi.
Hey, how's it going, Allison?
It's been a day. So.
Good afternoon, everyone. And good evening. I see some of you are on the other side of the world, or good morning. The two of us are very happy to be working with you today. It's been our pleasure to do a great deal of work with this wonderful organization. EduPlanet 21 has produced high quality curriculum mapping platform work and unit design work for many years now. And so I think it's timely that the two of us have a chance to share our current work and thinking and a new direction that we think builds on some of the previous work on unit design and on mapping, and takes it to a new level of connection with children and families, but also with teachers. So here's the problem. And you know what Einstein said, actually John Dewey said this too. A problem well stated is half solved. And we have a problem, a big curriculum problem. And I'm sure that many of you would agree that this is the case. It's overloaded, if not bloated. We keep adding every year, and more of what we receive tends to be pointed towards coverage, the way it's written. The language is even arcane. It isn't written for kids, and it's almost too much for teachers to shoulder. So we've seen that emerging. We've also seen the way that the forms we have to fill out, the design work we have to complete, is so overwhelming between juggling standards that are a list of proficiencies. They're not curriculum friendly. They're a list of meaningful proficiencies. I, as a teacher, have to juggle that with all the demands of the curriculum. And we saw that there's good intentions, but what needs to happen is there needs to be a decided shift. And so in considering that notion, what we'd like to propose to you are some new approaches. Allison?
So as we start to think about the reality of the challenge of existing curriculum content that is, again, focusing on meaningful proficiencies at the same time, and yet there are so many other aspects of the curriculum that are left to be included. So, for example, the problems and the challenges that are happening in real time are significant and important. Really starting to think about how do we get those folded into the curriculum in a space where time is precious and way too short. So trying to sort of think through and figure out how do we engage them in these kinds of authentic, rich problems, challenges, queries, acts of creation. Oftentimes, those are things that are the first things to get stricken from an existing curriculum, even if it's starting to be sort of anchored in any kind of horizontal or vertical curriculum template. At the same time, we're also seeing modern skills that are somehow already contained in the portrait of a graduate or the vision of a learner. But at the same time, there's not due diligence to continue to clarify not only the integration of those skills, but also the impact of those skills as part of powerful, contemporary, future-forward assessment and instructional practice. And then from a personal and a meaningful point of view, we also want to make sure that we're addressing who our learners are, where they're from, their cultural frame of reference, the opportunity for them to not only experience the curriculum as an individual teacher or curriculum designers have designed, but also make it their own. They're actually part of the learning experience. And when I'm part of the learning experience, I have my own take on it. There are certain problems and challenges and queries that a child actually wants to investigate, still in the name of the curriculum experience. So that's the tension, is that while we already have an overloaded, drawn out problem in terms of the coverage of the curriculum, there's still some meaningful areas that haven't been addressed yet.
So one of the things that we began to think about, and we began working on a book in fall of 2019, and then COVID hit, and it exacerbated our particular story. And what became clear is that we need to really come up with some approaches for streamlining. You know, the concept of streamlining isn't just to cut things out, it's to make things more efficient, more effective, frankly, more compelling. Now, I want you to look at this notion here that Dreyfus wrote about, who was the first person in engineering to use the phrase. It's to not only improve its utility, but its desirability. So if you think of a streamlined car, it's more attractive, it's more engaging. It's not just to go through the curriculum with a machete. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an opportunity and a process for thoughtful review, to simplify, to cut back. And we'll get into that a little bit more, consolidate, create. We want to streamline the curriculum, but we also found there was more to it than that.
So as we're starting to think about the idea of what kind of guidance or structure or parameters can we offer to help begin this process? And one of the things that is especially important to think about the power of using EduPlanet is to make these choices together, as opposed to what typical practice is that individual teachers decide to cherry pick certain assignments, problems, texts, questions, where it creates a disconnected experience, especially as students are moving from grade to grade to grade. So we're suggesting that the kinds of choices that are being made of what to cut, what to consolidate, and what to create are something that is energized by a powerful small team of designers to continue to clarify that experience.
And so this led us to another breakthrough, another aha. Okay, we came up with a pretty good review process, but what we realized, it was more the part about the desirability, the part about making it more effective, was a shift in the way we write curriculum so that we get away from unit design that is siloed. So if I look across a curriculum map and mapping something, I have some experience with this thing. And I got to tell you, I think I've contributed to the problem sometimes. I really will own that. And in that you can design a really good unit, but if it isn't connected across the year, then the students don't see the story of it. And that the richness of storytelling is what gives kids connections. We want to make it so at the end of 8th grade algebra, an 8th grader can tell you the story of algebra. They can see how what they began in the beginning of the year connects to the next and on so on. So we looked at how do we lay out a more efficient set of choices, better choices, but in a way that's more engaging, more compelling, and more visually appealing to students. And what is more, when you write a narrative, you think about your audience. And right now, curriculum isn't written for kids. We think it should be.
So let's take a look at this first example. And this is a grade 5 science example that comes from Virginia Beach City Public Schools. This was written by one elementary science coordinator. Her name's Nancy, and she actually drafted this, and I gave her feedback over the course of several months. Once it was ready for a test drive, she actually started to share it with teachers, with families, and with students to continue to get clarity as to how she can hone the visual. But when you start to take a look at this, just give you a moment to read. One of the interesting parts, and something that Heidi and I generally do when we show this as the first example of a curriculum storyboard, is to ask the question, where does your eye go to first? Where does your eye go to next? And so the interesting part is, regardless of where your eye goes, it's still telling a coordinated, coherent experience. So me, for example, my eye immediately gets drawn to the visuals. So I'm looking at the roller coaster, and then I read up to the title, and then I read down to the focus of the story and the learning targets. And then I begin to make sense of the first quarter in conjunction to the rest of them. But as I start to think about this, the idea that that roller coaster, the image that I have in my mind is echoed by the notion of we, that immediately grabs my attention. And it was interesting, as Nancy actually tried to draft this, she did this for the first quarter with the we, and she said, Allison, you think I could get away with doing another like one-word exclamation for the rest of them? And so not only did she do that, but she used the W's. So the interesting dynamic of trying to figure out what is compelling, not just to students in general, but in particular to 5th grade students.
That's right.
So it's not just the image and the expression, but also the emphasis of roller coasters and F-18s. And I don't know if you're familiar with Virginia Beach area, but F-18s fly overhead on a regular basis. So that's part of the kids' lived experience, as well as the local amusement park. That's part of the typical attraction, especially as elementary field trips. So that to me is another interesting dynamic of trying to get it so that students are feeling this experience as they're learning core science content.
Now, here's an interesting little reading challenge. I'm going to ask you to look at this again. If you read the focus of the story, it is written for the learners. Now ask yourself, what do you think is going to be more compelling, attractive, and engaging to an 11-year-old? Something about we know what energy is, but how can it be transformed versus a set of behavioral objectives? I respect the state of Virginia's behavioral objectives, but I got to tell you, they were not written for 5th graders in Virginia Beach. So the notion here is all the time and energy that's put into filling out a lot of forms could be converted into writing curriculum directly for students. So you have more time and energy to really work on what they're doing day to day. We are spending too much time on efforts that don't pay off directly for kids, where we could be much more efficient, much more effective, and absolutely fulfill our responsibilities.
You can also start to see the power of the learning targets, especially as they've been articulated by an elementary science coordinator, and again, vetted and honed with classroom teachers. So yes, there are a handful of learning targets for each one of these unit experiences. But at the same time, you can also appreciate that clearly there's not only 3 learning targets for each of the quarters. So it's trying to give a primary area of emphasis, but you can also see the power of that in terms of thinking about student-led conferences as the basis of it. Standards-based grades could be the basis of it. Instructional designs can be the basis of it. So continuing to clarify this as a 10,000-foot view as an organizing frame for the teachers to design and coach better instructional practice in their learners, but it's also from a learner's point of view to begin to track performance over time, as well as continue to have a leading role in their own story.
So there's components on a storyboard, and we've shown you one example. The components would be, what are we putting across? What's in those rows? There's a few things that we do see that are consistent in all of them. And then there's a lot of other options. One thing is you want a really compelling unit title that's clear, purposeful. You don't have to just make it clever. It's just that it's better. You know, it's like a book title. There's some that you're drawn to and that I understand as a reader. So a third grader may find a title really fascinating and interesting on rocks and minerals, whereas in a geology course in high school, you might have a different title. It's fundamentally in the same field. We're thinking of our reader, our student as the audience here. It serves our purpose that way, and it really focuses on it. The image we think is critical, whether you use icons or selected images. We have found teachers love this because it gets them to think about the essence, the big idea, the key concept they want to elevate. And you are drawn to images, and images do tell the story and they stick. So they have been one of the biggest breakthroughs, we think. And then the focus is written to be clear and accessible to the audience, whether it's parents or students. And eventually, you're going to be partnering with your students on the development of these storyboards as well.
We can also begin to think about other aspects that you could include in the storyboards. For example, when it comes to authentic demonstrations or authentic assessments or performance tasks, in the language of understanding by design, the opportunity to actually have a bright line feature as to the kind of problem, project, inquiry, investigation, or creation that the students are going to be creating in service to the focus of the story. You can also identify the standards specifically, similar to the learning targets that you just saw a minute ago, that could easily be paired with standards to continue to clarify that this is very much in alignment with what the state expects, as opposed to something that feels disconnected. You also could think about the idea of home resources. If it's truly something that families continue to feel like it's part of the learning experience 24/7, it's also a beautiful opportunity to actually create a hyperlink that can continue to suggest key questions that you can use to support your learners at home. So we want to share another concrete example. This comes from Michelle, who teaches early childhood science. So she's designing this for 3- and 4-year-olds. And again, if you can take a quick read for a moment. So as you start to see this essential question, for example, is it's a timeless essential question, especially for young learners. But what's interesting is that she started to see the grade 5 science as the example and immediately was super ignited to craft something for her little ones. And the dynamic here of the simplicity now of what's around me, what's up, what's down, it's immediately something that kids can visualize and make sense of. But so can families make sense of it as well, as they continue to do nature walks around their neighborhood park or their backyard. The other part of this too, notice, is that the focus of the story, because we're working with little ones, the idea is that the sentences become much more simple so that it's designed to be a read aloud for them. And again, when you're starting to imagine the idea of the description up top, our year of discovery will ignite our curiosity and connect us to the natural world. When you start to read those sentences, again, they're designed to be something that inspire and ignite the student scientists in front of the teacher, as well as the authentic demonstration of learning. And note the idea that she wanted to clarify something on behalf of several teachers of preschoolers in this particular school, but also clarify that there's ways of continuing to have teachers have their own thumbprints on the type of authentic demonstration of learning while still being within alignment of this.
Let me make a quick aside. Just reminded me of something. One of the teachers I worked with who teaches first grade in a school I'm working with in St. Louis did the most clever thing. She changed the font to a large print font, very much like what first graders see when they read. And the kids could read it. They sent it home. And then they had a picture in the demonstration, and the kids were to go home and explain it to the parents. I mean, believe me, the parents loved that.
Yeah.
And so did the students.
Lovely. So we wanted to show you another one. There we go. So as we're thinking about the idea of making a meaningful connection to both learning targets and transfer goals, something that perhaps is already in your unit template if you're using a UBD 2.0 template. This is an example from a geometry course. Now, one of the interesting challenges that we heard right from the very beginning is, yes, this looks more like something that an English teacher or a social studies teacher can do. But truly, Heidi and I continue to test and prototype this out. We find it to be helpful for the very youngest learners all the way through professional learning design. Yeah. And we think that it's very valuable, not only for one subject area at a time, but also continuing to invite interdisciplinary curriculum storyboards, as well as storyboards that are emergent, that are phenomena based.
Here's something else. Here's another thing we've learned. We're both very excited about this. We want to see connections. So the focus of the story isn't siloed. It's not just a synopsis. You're showing how the first one on foundational topics will connect to triangles, so that you're writing it in a way that connects. But here's what's interesting. The types of connections that'll emerge in the humanities for many people are pretty straightforward, though we often miss them. There are connections, conceptual connections that are absolutely vital in mathematics in order to show the transition from unit to unit and concept to concept. Teachers have had so many ahas about how those have been neglected.
Yeah. Now, one of the other interesting pieces, and that geometry is not an exception to the rule, is that the focus of the story start out as multi-paragraph treatises written in educator-facing language. And so one of the interesting dynamics is when you start to read that and begin to think about the difference of we versus students will know and be able to, it begins to start to shift the idea that we're writing this for and with students. So if we're trying to get them to be energized about the idea, that we think that the notion of personalizing it, using the word we, for example, the deliberate transitions of next as an example from first to second. But I think the other aspect of this is that you can start to see the connection between the applications, the investigations, that's at the very core of the focus of the story, which also continues to clarify the transfer goal and the learning target that is in service to that. So this is deliberately designed to be an integrated experience from top to bottom. but it starts from a drafting point of view. It starts with, it starts with a drafty draft. That makes some sense. So to me, and to Heidi, as you continue to think about, well, why take a look and do this? It starts to energize the teachers in a way that we haven't seen before, at least in my couple of decades in doing curriculum design.
I think that's absolutely true. And what you can see is students are partners in curriculum making. They become more self-aware. They begin to manage their own growth. They can give feedback to the teacher. Eventually, they'll be making their own choices and decisions, as well as they craft their own storyboards. It makes kids more socially aware of the relationship between others in the class, because we're partnering as a class. It becomes a collaborative venture as much as it is a personalized one.
So we want to show you an example that was crafted with Benna Kalick. So I know she's also listening in on the webinar right now. So this grade 3 social studies was actually something that was drafted in Bethesda, Maryland by a group of folks that I had an opportunity to work with. And as they started to imagine the grade 3 social studies, this was starting to be an integrated approach in ELA as well as social studies. So the notion is that in Q1, they started to think about their drafting of a personal narrative based on what they have been reading, as well as the production of a personal narrative. But the interesting dynamic here when it comes to the story and history is, how does telling my story actually impact who I am and how I see myself, but also how others might see me based on their reading and analysis of it. Then we move from the personal narrative, the personal story, to the idea of learning other people's stories. So Q2 is an opportunity to engage in the genre of oral storytelling. And as we do this, focusing on Indigenous people and African Americans in the 19th century. But the dynamic here is that we move from one genre to another in Q3, which is sort of the visual or the illustrated word. And then Q4 really has the opportunity to have the students begin to identify what story are they wanting to model one more time as they investigate and share the history of someone else. So what Benna Kalick joined and actually continued to craft with us is starting to think about some student prompts that are really getting the kiddos to actually start to reflect on their experience based on the social studies that they're learning so far. And the idea and the dynamic of the freshness of the story so far is so incredibly rich and important, because when it comes to thinking about curriculum storyboards, it's not just what's happening that the teacher's designing, it's how it's being interpreted and synthesized from a student lens, from a student point of view. So the idea of a student prompt, such as what values and traditions do you see in stories or the story so far? What are some of the values and traditions in a group you're a part of? So that they're starting to make sense not only of what they're seeing in other people's stories, but how it's connected to their own experience. And so the notion of having some kind of reflective prompt paired with a prompt with some kind of presentation of trying to continue to clarify, how do we capture their thinking, not as yet another formal assessment, but in a way that continues to get them energizing and reflecting on how they're experiencing so far. So that basically is the story we have so far for you. We're going to stop our screen share and turn it over to Jared, who will continue to take the lead. So Heidi's going to have the last word. And then
I want to set this up, Jared, and tout something about EduPlanet, if I might. I think one of the things that's very exciting about what you're going to see is, for me now, as I work with schools all over, continue to on mapping, I'm finding that many schools have struggled with mapping. It's challenging, But the schools where we've begun with storyboarding and moved into their software platform, it's been, I got to tell you, almost like butter. I'm not joking. It has been just eye-opening. They're clear about the bundling and placement of standards. The visual flow makes more sense so that when they go in, it's not so labor intensive. And they've literally changed the language in their maps to be student friendly. I think that what has been happening, in my understanding of what you've been doing at EduPlanet, is that you've done your due diligence and you've been highly responsive to this idea in giving people an option, not just to put the work into your existing software, but to create an adaptation that allows you to immediately storyboard so that you have it in there. And my hat off to you. I think that's just terrific. So I'm very excited for all of you to see the wonderful work that the team at EduPlanet 21 has done. Jared, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. So I'll turn it over to you.
Good. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Allison. Okay. Just going to share my screen here, everybody. So those who haven't seen our software before. So what I'm going to show you today is just some different examples of the storyboards that Heidi and Allison just showed you. So what I'll do is I'll go straight in and just show you an example of the ones that I've already created. And at the end of that, I'll show you how to create one quickly. So if we look at Algebra 1 here, what we have, is a little entry interface here. So we have our subjects, our grades, course name, with our central questions. And then we show our data units that are aligned so we can say 3 weeks in quarter 1. We have an image cue there, the focus of the story, and then also the standards that are aligned. So these are teaks that are aligned. And then when we hover over the little chip there, we can see the number there, and we can see what standard that applies to. All right, so to show you another example that we also created there. So this is early childhood science. So again, slightly different here. We've got a course description as well as the essential questions on the course. And then when we drill down into the units, we have the focus of the story, and then again, authentic demonstration of learning. So a free text field that can be filled out on a unit basis. So as you can see, these are quite flexible based on the needs and what you want to display in the storyboards. We're able to cater for that. So the different types of fields. I'll show you another quick one. So geometry. Here we are again. We've got some long-term transfer goals and some learning targets there as well. So again, totally flexible based on your needs, and we're able to do that. And also like on a subject or grade basis as well. It really doesn't matter. So when we have all that together, we have the component called our curriculum blueprint. So this can be public facing. So if we want to share this out to the wider community, we can give guys a link, and this can be put on the website. We can brand it with your colors and logos. So we have our subjects listing here, and we can sort of simply drill in. We can say show grades, and then click on the grade, and then we can see like there's our grade 5 science unit there. We can pop back out. We want to see some world language ones, and then we can drill into that as well. But as you can see, at the end of the day, like once we have all this created, we can simply publish that out for the wider community to see, which is fantastic. We've had a lot of great feedback on this, and people really enjoy this, and especially the right to know world that we live in. It's definitely productive. All right, so that's just what we have there in a flash. I'm going to did you have anything else you want to add there, Kelsey? I'll just say pop back on video before I go and show how to create one.
No, I'm just giddy with excitement over here and wanted to smile.
Kelsey, can we pop in with one thing? Jared, bravo. We know you have really heard us, and you are so creative and capable, and you should see the chat comments. Nice job, EduPlanet 21 and Jared. One quick point that we just wanted to share. There was an article that came out in the February issue of Ed Leadership that we wrote on storyboarding. It got quite a bit of attention, and we appreciate that. We do want you to know that what we're sharing with you, we're very excited about. It looks like it's August of this year. Our new book will be released on streamlining the curriculum and using the storyboarding approach to frame student journeys, engaging student journeys. And ASCD has chosen it as its world member book. So those of you who are members will get it. And it has been a labor of love.
Yes.
And so, and a lot of early morning conversations. So we are excited about that. And we want to thank you all for hosting us. So we'll turn it over to you, Kelsey. Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi. No, and just to kind of echo that, I'm so excited about all of the developments. I'm seeing all the chat come through, all the different comments, a lot of EduPlanet customers who are very, very excited about some of these new pieces. And those of you that have not turned on Course Planner yet, really think about making this the template and the framework that you utilize and really starting to dig into that concept of storyboarding. I think it's awesome and a really great way to connect with your learners. So that being said, oh, go ahead, Allison, go ahead.
No, Jared, I mean, so if you can actually share your screen again, because one of the things that I got super jazzed about is not just how Jared took some of the examples and made them so beautifully alive and rich. And again, I think it's so incredibly important, the notion that you can personalize the storyboard. You can identify what are the common topics or frames you want to call out, but also you can brand it using your own logo or color scheme or what have you. But I got even more giddy when Jared showed me how easy it was to create. So if you can share your screen again and show that, that would be super cool.
No problem, I can do that. So what I'm going to create is the adventure leadership. So you guys might have seen this example. So what I'll go through and just show how easy it is to create this one. So go back to, if we can simply add a course, we can call that adventure leadership. We can select our template. So this is what I showed before, the different ones. So this is the default template that we have. We can select our subject and our grade level. Once that's created, then we can go in and we can start working on this straight away. We can add our essential questions. So we can add that, and then that drops straight in. And now we can, start associating our units. So we can, if we'd already created units or had the units in another course, we can associate those. But in this case today, we're going to just create some new ones and add those in. So the first one there, create a community. We can select our images, which was this one, I believe. And then we can add our focus and then save and add another. And as you can see in the background there, everything's dropping in as expected. So we can add the next one here, a high performing team. You can select the image. Description. And then we can see that drops in. And then at the top there, we can simply say, how many weeks that goes to and save straight away. And you can see we got inline editing. If we realize we made a mistake, we want to, change this here. So fix that. And then we can press save and they can see that change gets made straight away. Or if we want to, and we can also do some reordering as well. We can drag things around and see how that pops around as well. So that's all within the entry interface there.
Jared, it looks intuitive, very intuitive. I have a question. If one of the things that we've been working on that's been fun, and you know this from our work on mapping, has to do with vertical articulation. So when you have your folders, you could have a folder, for example, that might have grades 3, 4, 5, 6 in math. Mm-hmm. We could take a look at them vertically too. And what we find is that the layout of storyboarding makes it very easy. I'm assuming we could do that exactly as I'm describing for you. That wouldn't be hard at all, correct?
Correct. Yeah, if we can set that up, we could definitely do that. So I haven't got that configured today, but we can. So.
That'd be great.
So.
Back to the giddiness now.
Yeah.
Allison, thanks for bringing that up too. I'm excited about that. So I know folks are dropping in some questions here and there. So I do want to kind of open it up for some questions, give you all a minute to go ahead. I know everybody was paying attention to how to go ahead and add the storyboards in the platform. So I want to give you all a minute. One that one of my customers did actually text through though. So I want to toss this out to you, Allison and Heidi. is you spoke a bit earlier in the session about how some of the core common components of the storyboard and some of the additional rows or components that you've seen as folks have kind of started to play around with this. So for a school that is brand new to the understanding by design framework and having a little bit of hesitance kind of moving into it, what do you see as some of the common components, or what's a good starting point to lend itself down the road to that unit design so it doesn't become a siloed type of approach?
One of the things that Heidi and I have found is that this is an incredible on-ramp, especially if you're planning on doing understanding by design, that level of detail as a next step. I think to actually be able to lay out your curriculum, starting to think about what are the topics that I'm already doing, to actually become aware of it. When I'm starting to think about another approach is beginning to think about the bundling of standards and starting to think through and figure out how do we make careful, deliberate choices as to how we're growing the experience over time. So there are a couple of different ways to get people energized and excited about it. And if you wanted to add, and you can clearly see, essential questions are a key component of this. If transfer goals, if that's something that you've already designed, or you're starting to think about leveraging your portrait of a graduate or a vision of a learner more directly, you can absolutely do that too. Sometimes people are very clear on the learning targets or the focus skills. So the dynamic of continuing to think about sort of the broader aims and the sort of the clarification of those short-term goals are a nice, easy way or an on-ramp in. But I think the other wild card, and I'm going to turn it over to Heidi, is the notion that we're writing this for students.
That's right.
So we're trying to also say we're not just auditing what is, but we're looking at what is and saying, is this story interesting? Is this story going to energize my learners? Is this a story worth telling? And if not, how might we continue to energize and innovate? So that's really the territory of what to cut out, cut back on, consolidate, and create.
I love the question, and what Allison has done remarkably well in about 30 seconds is to put out all of the things to consider. But here's something I've learned from the field, and we've talked about this. I have found the best way in is to lay out your unit titles the way you have them. You're going to see them and see whether they're even the least bit interesting to students to start. And they probably aren't. Please don't take this personally. They're not. They usually aren't written for kids. But I have found it's the combination of that picture, the question, but most important is the focus of the story. Oh, people immediately put down student will be able to. So I go like, no, that's office language. What's this really? You're telling me I'm a fourth grader. I've never done a road trip around the United States geography. Tell me what we're doing. You start to think about your kids. How do you explain this story to them? That shifts the mindset. Otherwise, honestly, it could be just cut and paste, couldn't it, Jared? I could put in stuff that looks good, but it isn't a storyboard.
I think the other part too is that once the storyboards are written, they're actually a promise that the school or that individual teacher is having with students and their families. So I think that's another dynamic of making sure that as we're crafting the focus of the story, especially if it's being written for a handful of teachers, or in Nancy in Virginia Beach's case, she's written it for hundreds of teachers, that there is enough clarity as well as wiggle room so that folks can continue to put their thumbprints on it as individual teachers. Students can actually make sense of the learning tangents and inquiries and problems that they want to pursue while still being within the field of what the expectation is.
You know, one time with one of the groups we work with in Missouri, this teacher came up with a great idea. She said, I'm going to write 3-unit focus of story for my kids. I'm going to teach second grade. I'm going to run it by them and see what they do when they see the pictures. Over the top, knocked out. she had kids saying things like, now I understand what we're working on, or you make a very good connection between this thing and the next thing. It is amazing. You really are writing it with them and for them. So I don't think, the bundling and placement of standards is a critical piece. We absolutely want the learning targets, but it's the idea of the narrative and who the audience is that's the winner here. So whatever it takes to do that, I'm all for. You can do it in drafts. We believe in that. There was a group we worked with earlier today where we were saying, just don't put all the components in at once. You could have different components for different audiences. Isn't that also true, Jared? That I could print them out for different groups. So to start with, I think it's real important to get this, the idea of storyboarding connections and taking all of this material, making it palatable, accessible, desirable for students.
I just also want to give a heads up. Christine actually in the chat said she just found the curriculum storyboarding website. So we should say that curriculum storyboards, especially as we started to launch that about a month ago, getting excited and energized for the release of our book. This also will be a place where we'll have more of a gallery of examples, as well as interviews, blog posts from Heidi and myself, etc., as we continue to see the vibrancy of this come alive.
Hey, Christine, we hadn't planned on releasing it today, but thank you. It's great.
Wow, that's awesome. Very cool. Now I'm so excited about the whole concept. I actually had one of the customers that I work with pretty often had a whole PD day today centered around the idea of storyboarding, and saw the webinar coming out later and wasn't able to attend because of running a PD day. But said that, Heidi, to your point, they're actually starting with different components for different audiences, and they're starting really small, and they're going to keep layering new rows, new components on top of that as they see fit. And that might be different for each department. It could be different for each grade level because they have lower and upper school. So I think that's great. Another question that we had in the chat window is, in early childhood education, we have state regulations that outline requirements, such as 5 domains covered each day with 5 different supplies. How could we add these components in our written curriculum or storyboards without micromanaging teachers?
What was the subject area?
It just early childhood education in general. So probably think younger kiddos, preschool, where it's very, intertwined.
Okay, chances are, and I don't want to assume anything, but chances are these are very natural, sensible arenas for children's development. Probably deals with social, emotional, physical, the beginning of language communication, of course. So in any good curriculum and in a good story, there's elements in a story. So as you lay out the story, the one thing I think that you may want to play with is some things will have more emphasis than others. That's a natural byproduct of planning it. And you would want to include those components in your curriculum. So I don't see that as problematic. I think that's smart planning. But if it becomes a rigid checklist, then I don't think you've got a story. I think you have a rigid checklist. So it's a fair question, I think.
So, and Haley, I mean, as I continue to reflect and hear Heidi's response, I'm also thinking about the early childhood science is another interesting example to reflect back on. It's going to be in the webinar that you'll get a recording of. I think it's also on the Curriculum Storyboard site if you wanted to lean in and take a look at that a little bit more. But I think the dynamic is that the 5 different supplies, the opportunity to start seeing the interdisciplinary nature of things is not just each subject area, but also starting to think about the idea of relationship skills, the notion of like development of fine motor skills. So there's opportunities that are very much embedded in that early childhood example. I think the other last part is that this is designed to be this kind of 10,000 foot view so that teachers can also begin to make deliberate choices as to how to integrate those 5 domains in service to that broader picture. So I think that's the other small piece, is that starting to think about and imagine that at a more topical or learning plan level is significant and important. But if the curriculum storyboard becomes too encumbered by too much stuff, that it loses the purpose altogether. So we have found that a curriculum storyboard should be no more than 2 pages if you wanted to do a semester 1, semester 2, but trying to figure out what is most significant to communicate at that 10,000 foot view, not simply to a teacher facing audience, but clearly to students and their families. So what's the story they want to hear as they begin to roll up their sleeves and get engaged and energized by the kinds of questions, problems, challenges, and creations they're going to be pursuing?
I want to bookend that with something I'm thinking about in the book. There's another way to look at streamlining, because right now it looks to me like the majority of people are practitioners in schools, leaders in schools. And on one end of the bookend are larger systems. And they have every intention of they have to give money to schools, they have regulations and so forth. But those documents aren't always very teacher friendly. And we do think there needs to be a need for more streamlining there too. And at the same time, we think too much time is spent in schools filling out forms, working on curriculum maps, quite frankly. And again, we own part of this. And spend more of our time on what your kids are doing every day, more times with them. So that if you in fact can combine this. So if I were to go into EduPlanet, Jared, and I was a 5th grade teacher and I was putting that energy unit in, and that's in there. I've got my map, I've shown my standards, that I can use it with my kids. I'm in. I don't have to fill out a lot of other stuff. I can begin to really focus on what those kids are going to do in class each day. So much energy is sapped. So what I think has been a sort of interesting thing we didn't expect is right now we need a spark. People have gone through a couple really rough years. This is energizing people. I understand it. I own the curriculum. I can make sense of it. And so on both ends, the direct encounter with the student on the lesson plan level, on the systems level, we write very directly and we show some examples of places which have done a good job providing teachers with more teacher-friendly type of documents too.
I also want to piggyback on what Heidi just said, like the idea, I know it's dangerous, especially when there's like no virtual
room. Oh man.
But one of the things that she said, she goes, I own the curriculum. She's talking about from the teacher's point of view.
Yeah.
That's also what we want for kiddos.
Kids,
so
right.
From a personalizing point of view, this is very much at the core of what learning should look like, feel like, and sound like in the classroom. And I think that's part of the dynamic here of how to continue to make sure that it feels like a partnership. It's a story or a journey we're all on together. And it's not necessarily codified to the gills. I think that's the other opportunity that Heidi and I continue to feel as we've been prototyping this, is that curriculum needs to breathe.
Yeah.
And the notion of that porousness, that breathability is so incredibly rich and dynamic because there's room. Once you start making those kinds of cutbacks and consolidations, there's room to play, to problem solve, to tackle something that just showed up yesterday and fold that into the curriculum immediately. That to me creates a way of continuing to energize and make sure that the curriculum is responsive to the learners right now, as opposed to the learners 20 years ago.
So we see all teachers as creative writers. You're writing and composing a curriculum, a storyboard. And the origins of storyboarding as a phrase came from the Disney studios during their original days. And it has been picked up and used by all kinds of organizations and groups, not only in film, but also in areas like dance or in architecture or anything that requires sort of a journey type of experience. And so you're composers, you're making choices, you're not coverage monitors. And so we want to take the best of what we're required to do, but to give it juice.
So the one thing that we want to make sure that we make another plug for is that we are actually going to lead a 3-day storytelling development journey in Pennsylvania, actually. So it's being hosted in Altoona, Pennsylvania by the World of Learning. So it's June 14th to the 16th. So if you're interested in finding out more information, we'll go ahead and share that information to Claire so she can push that out with the webinar. But also,
it's IU8.
Yeah.
It's IU8, the intermediate unit 8. Excuse me.
Oh, yeah. No,
Yeah.
but I mean, I think the idea is that fresh off the school year, if you're really looking to begin to energize and take action on some of these ideas, they are still open for registration.
They are.
So,
yeah, it's going to be cool. And we're going to support it through the year.
and it will be an on-site experience, which is super exciting
Oh my
to spend time for 3 days there as well.
And I believe we're hoping there'll be some EduPlanet folks there too, Jared. So that'll be pretty cool. So some of your users. Thank you.
That is awesome. Now, and Heidi, just I hate to piggyback on the piggybacks, but I'm going to. Anyway. I think it was so cool. I was on site with one of my school districts last week, and we were talking about the idea of after COVID, a lot of folks really started to cling to the idea of a portrait of a graduate or a portrait of a learner, and really starting to get back to basics with what are the skills, what are the dispositions, what are the habits of mind that our students should be demonstrating. And the most interesting thought I heard was, I actually used your term of the creative curriculum writer too, is that teachers are so tired and so desperate for ways to demonstrate their craft and their creativity that we often focus so much on, we're talking every day around what are the dispositions, what are the characteristics we want our students to display. But really, this is a cool opportunity for teachers to get those creative juices flowing, to collaborate, to interact with one another on what this could look like. And I think that's just a really cool experience. So thank you guys both very, very much for all of your wisdom and advice that you shared with us today. For those of you that are EduPlanet customers, keep an eye out in the next couple of weeks. We're going to have these exciting updates live for you, and we can start to talk about what that might look like. So just a couple of quick thank you items and wrap up here. Again, keep an eye out for the recording here in the next week or so. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to reach out to your customer success manager. We are more than happy to discuss with you moving forward. And again, just another plug to follow us on social media. We will be sending out that recording here and some helpful advice from Heidi and Allison as well. Thank you guys both so much for being here. Enjoyed having you both in the same room for once too. Allison, enjoyed your trip to New York. Jared, thank you so much as well for showing us the new updates today, and hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Heidi. Thanks, Allison.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.